Hello. Good morning. Thank you for having us. Delano and I work for for-profit news, so thank you especially for having us here. Okay, so just to familiarize everyone with what exactly our panel here does, we're just going to open by going down the line here and hearing a bit about your institutions and the work you're doing, and that will get us started for the rest of this conversation. Let's start with Delano.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate this. Thanks for coming out and all the smoke. I'm Delano Massey. I am the managing editor of Axios Local. Axios is in 29 markets, soon to be 30 markets across the country, from East Coast to West Coast and many cities in between. What was the other thing? What do I do?
Yeah, tell us about your job. Well, tell us what you guys are doing in those markets as well.
We do a lot. And I've been there for over a year now. And one of the things that Jamie Stockwell and I have been trying to do is like put up some of the guardrails and to sort of change the editorial content, raise the standard, things like that. But what we have is some of the best reporters in every local market, and they know their cities because they live in the cities. They are their cities. And so what we really try to do is just have conversations about the things that, like, you know, we would talk about at a coffee shop, like what's going on, and then we capture that and then we put it in the newsletter. And our main vehicle for news is dissemination in the newsletters, but we also have discovered that we have a website, Axios.com, and so we're starting to put a lot of energy into that as well. So Jamie and I work really hard on the strategy, and so we're here. I'm an open book too. If you have any complaints, I dare say that you can email me. I'm very accessible.
Or at the end of this panel, we'll have some time for questions. So if you have them, don't be shy. Emily?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for coming. So I am the editor and founder of a very tiny little newspaper in the Hudson Valley of New York. The Hudson Valley is between New York City and upstate. We are not upstate. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we cover two towns. The towns of Rhinebeck, which you actually probably know. This is where Chelsea Clinton was married, Hillary Clinton's daughter, a number of years ago, I think 2010. It's a community that is upwardly mobile, I would say, a slightly older audience, about 52 is the average age there. Eric Schmidt, the, I think, original CEO of Google, is buying property there, owns an airport on the other side of the Hudson River. Just to give you some sense, but about 4 to 5% poverty rate as well in Rhinebeck. North of Rhinebeck, 5 miles and about a 10-minute drive, is the town of Red Hook, where I live. Red Hook is a town of about 20 farms and Bard College, which used to be an underfunded social service kind of school, private school, but because of a $500 million infusion from George Soros and a matching gift challenge that was just achieved, hi, big news, you can read about it in the Daily Catch when I get around to writing it up, which will be after I cover the fire that just devastated one of our farmers. In any event, those are the communities that we're covering. We put out pretty much a story a day, about, on average, sometimes 2. And when we put a story out, we have a newsletter that follows directly thereafter. We also put out obituaries, events, and movie newsletters throughout the week. So we're putting out about 13 to 14 newsletters a week. We are run by me and our publisher, Walter Mullen, who's sitting, can you just wave your hand, Walter, so everyone can find you later? Neither Walter nor I draws a salary. And then just very briefly about me, just very quickly, I had my life as a reporter at Newsday many, many years ago. In 1995, when New York Newsday folded, I was there working. I had been covering the education and transportation beats, where I really made my mark, I hope to think. And I thought I was done with journalism. I actually got into the academic world. I went back to school, became an art historian. We can talk as a sidebar about why the two are related. And then a few years ago, I just decided it would be fun to start a newspaper. I have no idea why I thought that. I have no idea what I was doing, other than I knew how to still hold a notebook and ask questions. And today we are at about 4,200 readers, having grown from about 83. So it seems like I'm not going to be able to stop doing this because I don't think our readers are going to allow it. But Alice Drager and I of East Lansing Info talk about this, and we can talk about burnout later.
Thank you,
you.
Emily. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nicolás.
Hello, I'm Nicolás. For friends, it's Nico, so please call me Nico. I'm the Director of Audiences and Communities at Documented. We are a local, so we report on immigration and immigrant communities in New York City mainly, but also at large in the state of New York. We started 4 years ago, already 5 years ago, as a media company that was primarily serving people that work in immigration as an industry, lawyers, judges, people that lobby Congress, etc. But then we understood, and then we saw that we were an immigration news outlet that was not being read or consumed by immigrants. So now we expanded via an operation on WhatsApp that's called Documented Semanal to Latino communities, and now we are working on expanding that same engagement operation via WhatsApp, but to Black Caribbean immigrants via Nextdoor, and to Chinese immigrants via WeChat. So soon we will be launching those two products. We also have a huge operation on evergreen content that is not your regular news cycle related article. And of course, we continue to serve that original professional immigration news industry audience. So we basically function as a bridge between the people with high salary that make a profit out of the immigration as an industry, if you can say that, and the immigrant communities that live in New York, by being a city with more than half of its population as immigrants, it's a huge audience.
Great. Okay, so we have 3 people on this panel with 3 very different perspectives on journalism. So let's hear now a bit more about how you guys serve your audiences and what they come to you for. Why don't we start with you, Nico?
Yes. So as I said, we started with this audience that works in the industry of immigration, lawyers, judges, people that lobby Congress, researchers, academia, etc. To serve that audience, we have a newsletter that's called Early Arrival. It's got a very good open rate and very high number of people that subscribed. Nothing, of course, is compared to Axios, but it's good for a local news outlet. And we, as I said, we have an operation on WhatsApp where we engage. It's not only a distribution, top-down, one-way distribution channel, but we have someone that spends 70% of their day, his name is my colleague Romel Ojeda, responding manually one by one to people on WhatsApp, people that now are more than 6,000 people that have a conversation with us on a weekly basis. Imagine how it's like on a Monday when it's been 2 days without responding. It's crazy.
For people here who do not know how to run a newsletter on WhatsApp, how exactly does that work?
So WhatsApp is owned by Meta. Meta sells ads. They don't sell ads on WhatsApp. They make every single thing against us publishers being on WhatsApp. Actually, to be a news outlet on WhatsApp goes against their terms and conditions. We are officially violating their terms and conditions. Don't tell them.
It's disruptive.
Have another one here that's doing that too. However, so we came to WhatsApp not because we decided to go on WhatsApp, but because we conducted audience research first. We understood the needs of the Latino immigrants of New York City, and people that are not, or that are immigrants in many parts of the world know that everyone is on WhatsApp. Your family, it's your where your group family, like family groups are, etc. So people said that their main source of news in that research, but also in the Reuters Institute research that year, was WhatsApp for this specific audience. So we decided to go where the audiences are, and that is WhatsApp still for news because that's where people are consuming news. Now, because WhatsApp is the place where you get your messages from your mom and your friends, etc., you're used to respond to those messages. So we couldn't just make an operation to say, hey, this is what news, and not be able to respond, which is basically what a lot of media companies, us included, do on social media. We put something on Twitter, and the responses, we don't really take them into account. We do take the conversations into account, the messages into account. We make them data that is very manual because, again, WhatsApp is not a CMS. They don't make it easy. And based on those trends of people now are talking about shelters, right? We match that with the analytics that we get on our website, and when there is a match in between the conversations and the data, that's a story that we assign to a reporter, and then because there is a need for that information, that article then gets consumed a lot.
Okay, I gotta ask, because WhatsApp, as far as I know from my mom's engagement on WhatsApp, is also where misinformation and fake news circulates. What's it like trying to circulate good information, responsible journalism in a forum where there's a lot of crap?
To Meta's credit, that's the reason they say they don't allow publishers, because it's where, so we have, it's a good thing to be on WhatsApp, which is the black box where all the misinformation goes, because we are able to get it firsthand and before anyone else. We have tried to imitate the fake news methodologies, for example, right, for good reasons. For example, in WhatsApp, if you send 4 images, they make like a square of 4 thumbnails. So we said, maybe we could be sending news in 4 images, so they become 4 thumbnails, but with actual misinformation fact-checking, all right? Or for example, for when COVID happened, a lot of people were asking us, how can I get, what is COVID? How can I get tested? What happens if I get tested? Will that information end up in ICE, right? So we made explainers that we then got sent as these 4 thumbnails, and we understood that's the way that people are just forwarding information. So we got to be WhatsApp viral with the methodologies that fake news were using, but for good reasons.
Wild. I imagine you're gonna have some questions for Nico later. Emily, let's talk about your newsroom, and you said you serve an audience of about 4,000. Tell me more about what you're delivering them and what they want from you guys.
Thank you. So at our international headquarters, which is my living room, we run our newsroom of 1 me and 1 full-time reporter and 1 intern. We are covering bread and butter local news. We cover town meetings. Our town structure and government structure in New York is very complicated. We have towns and villages in the same geographic boundary. We cover town meetings. We cover Board of Ed meetings. We do, as I mentioned, events, movies, and so forth. I sometimes feel like I'm the personal concierge for 4,200 readers, many of whom email me about their questions. We also cover features. We do a lot of feature stories. We just won 3 New York Press Association awards for our coverage of features. We swept that category, actually, which was extremely exciting for a paper our size. We are also trying really hard to do more enterprise and investigative journalism, because that's the tradition out of which I grow. So as an example, on May 19th, as I mentioned earlier, we had a huge fire, about $1 million loss at our largest vegetable farmer. And we really dropped almost everything to cover the aftermath of that fire. Last week, I put together a very long, probably way too long, story about all of the major fires that had occurred in our communities in the last 150 years, relying on dozens of sources, dozens of historical records, and so forth. So we're trying to punch above our weight. It's sometimes not always successful, but that's what we're attempting to do.
Do you have competition?
We do now have competition, interestingly. In one of our communities, there's a newspaper called the Hudson Valley Pilot, and we can talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
That's for later. Okay, Delano, tell me a bit about, you guys just do 3 very dramatically different things, so I feel like you maybe have the most to explain because you've got so many markets, and I don't know, you tell me.
Soon to be in Axios Hudson Valley.
Oh.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
You promised you wouldn't come for at least 3 years.
No,
A little bit of fire, too.
So I guess, I kid.
Do you pay your staff?
Very well. Yeah. In the beginning, there was Axios. And then, it's true. That's what
2 years
happened.
ago.
Like 6 years ago. 6 years ago. 2.5 years ago, they birthed Axios Local. Basically, as the news industry started to sort of, implode. A lot of things happen in the news industry. And Axios wanted to try to sort of meet some of those needs. A little bit earlier, we were talking about like my hometown. I could say I'm from the Cleveland area, greater Cleveland, specifically Medina, Ohio. I would never be able to pitch Axios Medina. But Cleveland, absolutely. And there was a time where the Plain Dealer was absolutely like the paper of record. And eventually there was a nasty split between Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. I'll spare you the details, but it's the same thing, but it's really not the same thing. And it created a divide there. And that's what's happened in a lot of different cities across this country. So Axios, when I got there in April, it was in 14 markets, and now we're in, we'll say 30, because we'll eventually launch the San Diego newsletter. And we'll try to see where things go next. I think it's different depending on where we are. And I think the strategy is different depending on where we are too. We have like 5 really big cities. They're like our big cities like DC, Tampa, the Twin Cities, Denver, and Chicago. And those are the ones that if in some ways they have sort of mastered the craft. They're really good at like working well with their audience, telling the right stories. I think there's a particular cadence that the newsletters need to reach. And it's like, they can dip in and out of different stories and they have some depth and some range, and it's not going to be the same.
Can you tell us what like today's newsletter might look like in San Diego, or yesterday's maybe?
San Diego doesn't exist yet.
Oh, sorry, launching soon.
There is a test, yes, launching soon.
Give me one that's just an example.
I think like in Philadelphia today, like the one big thing, the one story that you would look at, it's like your headline that is like dark, bold, and it's across the newsletter, if you will. And it's about smog, like and how Philadelphia ended up having to cancel a number of events, high schools, and even the Phillies game, and the effect of that. But what we try to do is give it to you in a very succinct way, and as opposed to like the narrative, it's smart brevity. So we're going to give you why it matters. Like literally, that's one of the axioms, like why it matters. And the reporters have to perfect that. Like if we're in an elevator, it's your elevator pitch, right? Like this is why you need to know this story. And really, that's all that we're doing. We're tapping people on the shoulder, saying like these are the 5 things that you need to know today. If it's in Miami, it's that unfortunately the Miami Heat lost, or fortunately for the Denver market, Denver won. So it's a mixture, and it's not sports. We don't cover sports, but we are like on the periphery of it. I think what we try to do, we have like 2 reporters in most cities, 3 in some of the larger ones. So it is unrealistic, and I could disavow everyone of this notion. We are not competition. Like we're not competing with like the Philadelphia Inquirer, because we can't. Like we don't have a newsroom that is that size. We have 2 reporters, and one of the things that I have to guard against and try to get my reporters to understand is we are not competing against them. Like we can't. What we can do is provide you with the things that you need to know, and if there is, and what my job is now is also helping with enterprise. And so if there is a story that needs like a deeper dive, like we have a link that says go deeper, like you could say that's Delano's job now. Like to help you go deeper and to try to figure out like if you want to go beyond the bullet points that are on the first page, like you can go even further. And that's one of the things that we really try to do.
And where does Go Deeper take you? Does it take you to Axios journalism or local journalism or both?
Website. So we're our website. I was really kidding about the website. We didn't just discover it, but it was not the focal point. Now we are shifting the focus, because for us, we are also punching above our weight class, because we're going after in some ways, like I would say we're not competing, but we kind of are competing. Maybe we're like competition adjacent. Right? Like we have, what? Like
Friendly competition?
Sort of. Like we have big aspirations. So we do want to like make noise, and we want to make news, but we also do local events. And I think that from my standpoint, an event is now like a 3-dimensional conversation that we're having. Like, what is the mayor doing? Like, sit down and tell us. Right? In Minneapolis, they were working on a story about like the police settlements, and it's a lot. in Minnesota at large. There's a lot of settlements. And so that is a very important story, and we're going to cover that too. It doesn't matter what it is. We've covered shootings. We did the anniversary of Uvalde. We are absolutely going to cover the stories that people are talking about. And so the growth that has happened over the years, I think we reached 1.5 million people, 1.5 million subscriptions overall if you add all of the markets. But it breaks down differently for the different cities, you know.
That's a good segue because I want to talk about what's working about your funding models before we talk about perhaps challenges with your funding models. So let's give everyone an idea of how y'all pay the bills and like how it's functional. And let's start with you, and we'll go back down the line.
We pay the bills a number of ways. Like the newsletter is one vehicle for that. There's advertising. It's not very obtrusive. It's just like a very subtle ad. So that's one way that we pay the ads. Like with the website, we're trying to build that out so that we also have like another stream of revenue. And the same with the events. Like the event space is an opportunity. You're looking for sponsors who can, we can do different events. We did one in Baton Rouge to talk about environmental justice. And it's like the conversation that people needed to have in that community, and who is willing to or who wants to tell it. And that's the way that we approach that.
And people showed up, and you guys made some money, or?
Not as many people that are in this room, but we did, yes. Like we had the events team worked very hard to try to fill the room, and most of the time, like it could be business executives, and they're doing like reach outs to make sure that we have the people actually respond to the RSVPs. So yes, and then we also stream them so that people are able to see it. If they're not able to actually make it to the event, they can follow along online.
Okay, advertising and events, Emily.
Awesome. So I want to talk just briefly about successes in general, because I think they're all kind of cyclically tied together. First of all, we have a very successful, I think, leadership team led by our publisher, Walter Mullen, who I mentioned earlier. There is no way that this newspaper could have gone into its second year if I was continuing to do what I was doing. I would not only have burned out, there just aren't enough hours in the day. So that's a really crucial piece, I think, of maybe any young organization's success. I would imagine my colleagues would agree. We are also not a for-profit model, so we don't have to make money. We just have to break even, obviously. So in terms of success, we are going to be next year having a slight surplus, we predict. We're funded about 45 to 46% from grants, and those are not big national grants other than Newsmatch, which is absolutely essential, not only because we last year made the $18,000 match number, but because other donors are so impressed by the success of Newsmatch. So that's another really important piece. The other funding that we're seeing that's coming in from grants is all locally generated. And I can talk later if there's time or in the hallways about why I actually do not want to have my hand out to big national media organizations or big national funders. I believe that our organization should be able to succeed from the success of our own internal local community base. The third thing is that we've been very successful in growing our audience. I actually don't really know how that's happening. I wish I could tell you. We started, as I mentioned, with 83 readers. They were my friends. I don't even have 83 friends, so I don't know where they were either. But we're up to 4,283 as of this morning. So that's just phenomenal growth. And I think, again, that underneath all of it is that our journalism is good. Our journalism is sound. We have very high standard. We pay our staff, the very small staff we have, I think slightly above the going average because I want really quality people. And then just another piece that I want to mention is our mission is not only to produce a newspaper, our mission is to train new young reporters, not many of them at a time, one of them at a time, but our first reporter is heading down to Washington, D.C. after 2 years with us and an award-winning 2 years at that. So I think we're doing really well. I'm really proud. Thanks.
Congrats. Nico.
Well, yeah. So we are mainly grant funded as well as nonprofit. The good side of it is that it lets us experiment a lot. For example, as I said, we let's us experiment even like the question of what is journalism. Is it your regular article with a couple of sources? For example, we have something that does really well from the conversations on WhatsApp. We're able to understand what people need at the moment, and then instead of responding one by one, because that's what happened to me when I was first responding on WhatsApp in 2020 for COVID, what is like, if I test positive, will that information end up with eyes? So instead of responding that 125 times, we made it an article. And then at the end of the, like after a month, we had so many articles that we reshaped that and we called it our library of resources. The library of resources is information that is not linked to the news cycle, that is evergreen, and that is now 60% of the monthly traffic in Documented. Because that has expanded to many things: mental health resources, domestic violence resources, how can I get a pro bono lawyer in New York, etc., right? So, for example, that has led us, this funding that has led us experiment on that. Hold town hall events digitally on WhatsApp, for example, something that my friends here in Connecta do pretty well too. To research on audiences on their needs, not only by having conversations, but by actually doing research with methodology to understand their needs before we even launch something that seems super foreign to me as a Latino, that is an engagement tool on WeChat, right? So grants are letting us execute on those experiments. We're trying to diversify revenue on different levels, right? We are selling now ads too on our website, but also on WhatsApp. Now we sell ads on WhatsApp. Sorry, Meta. We're still at it. We're holding events. We're trying to come up with some tech that we could be selling or maybe providing for free via other grants to our peers that are nonprofits. Something that we really are good at is, if you think about it, is embedding and getting access to underserved communities. 60 or 70% of the people that are in our WhatsApp distribution or conversation channel are undocumented people. Thus, it's maybe one of the best ways to access the undocumented population via one single channel in New York City. So then we get the government coming up to us like, hey, we have this public campaign, right? Or for example, we get now politicians, AOC just message us for an interview because they want to reach this population, right? So how to get access or how to get conversations with underserved communities is something that we are now coming up with an idea to provide consultancy, even for governments, right? And the guides themselves, because they are so good with page views and they don't die because they're not linked to the news cycle, it's something that we have been experimenting with sponsored content too.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes left. So, and I want to save about 10 minutes for questions from you all. So let's spend our final 10-ish minutes together on this panel talking about your greatest challenges and be as honest or dishonest as you want. Nico, let's start with you.
We could do a better job at trying to monetize the professional audience that we have. They make money and we have not been able yet to have a strong membership or donation system as we would like to. However, and we're really happy to say, we now have members of our WhatsApp, mainly undocumented people, saying, hey, I want to donate to your organization. So that makes us really proud, you know. That is, I think, the biggest challenge. How do we diversify the revenue model aside to not only be grant funded so that grants are not that huge amount of your revenue model, but how you can make the pie look a little bit more diverse.
Thank you. Emily?
Thank you again. So I think without exception, our biggest challenge is hiring. I don't understand this because I hear there are so many young kids who want to be journalists. we have not found it easy to find them, to place them, to interview them, to get them in operation. It's just the most confounding problem for us. And if any of you have ideas, I'm going to be here for the next 2 days. I want to hear them. I was talking again, I mentioned Alice Drager to you. She's one of my mentors in this project. I look at her sometimes and I notice she's still here, she's still kicking, and I'm like, that's what I'm going to look like in 8 years. I'm still going to be doing this. Alice recently suggested trying to get retired college professors, since we're right near Bard. So that's probably the biggest pain point. I think there's also a huge pain point around just not enough hours in the day. I'd like to think I'm really efficient, but I literally am up till 2 in the morning many nights answering emails. I somehow can't go to sleep until I've cleared the inbox, and I think that's an illness that I suffer from. It's really a terrible burden, but I also feel so responsible to these people now. They're like my children, these readers. Does anybody else feel that way? It's crazy. It's not a sustainable thing, and maybe it's some kind of weird narcissism, and I need to go to therapy instead of run a newspaper. But that's another really big challenge. And then I think there's also just a challenge around not being able to cover as many things as I know we should be covering. For example, just listening to you today, Nico, we have a growing Hispanic population in both communities, Red Hook and Rhinebeck, up to about 4 to 7%, depending on the community, 5 to 7%. And we're reaching them very sporadically. I say, let's translate that story into Spanish. I call my friend Martha Tepepa, and I say, Martha, can you translate? She's like, yes, I'll do it in 2 hours, and that's up. We have no consistent program for translating into Spanish, which means we aren't really serious about reaching that community. And I think I want to reach that community. So there just aren't enough hours. And then that also pertains to the kinds of things we cover. So I know we're going to make it to the planning board meeting, but am I going to make it inside a community to talk about some challenge that a family is facing as their daughter, who's 11 years old, battles cancer? Probably not. I'm going to be able to write about the fundraiser for her on our events page, and I'm going to have to leave it at that. Every day I am leaving stories on the table, and it just feels terrible. Okay, that's so depressing, but it's also very heartwarming.
This is the depressing section of the conversation.
This is the depressing section, yeah.
It's okay. You two should collaborate, though, on reaching Latin audiences.
Let's talk.
Okay. Delano.
The funny part about working at Axios for me when I got there is that it's about smart brevity, and I'm not somebody who is ever brief. But, I have a long list of things that I could tell you about. I basically, at this point, I'm trying to pivot from putting out fires to focusing on like journalism and helping to elevate the journalism that we're doing across newsletters.
Can you tell us about the fires?
It would be way too much, right? But I try to make sure that we don't get sued. Like that's one of them. So I'm kind of like a bee that is like hopping from flower to flower. So I try to hop from market to market, and it's really hard to get to all 30. It's also hard to get to read all 30 newsletters every day. I don't. Some days I do better than others because there will be something that will come up. And we also have a junior team in some ways. So we had to, when I first got there, I'm supposed to be honest?
Yeah.
Okay. There was.
It's up to you.
There weren't a whole lot of guardrails. I'll say it was a reporter-driven newsroom, and then Jamie and I came in April after it had already been in existence for a long time, and I was like, whoa, wow, wow, there's a lot happening in here. Okay. But I had just come from CNN, and I was at the AP, and part of the reason that I was hired was because I look at things and I can scale, and I look at like the regions, and so it was like putting the cities into different buckets. Like let's make some sense of this. I also like workflow and like doing things that most people don't, and that's been like the core thing that I would do at any newsroom. So that's basically it. So like figuring out the structure, and now we have a very firm foundation. And now, like in this next year, for me and for my team especially, like I have younger editors who haven't been in this position before. So it's a lot of one-on-ones and trying to coach them through situations, difficult conversations, discipline, things that you didn't imagine, but you're at a startup, and because you're at a startup, all of these things are an issue. And I also have to try to figure out how to come up with a sustainable and profitable model, like small challenge, right? I'm in Pointer and I'm trying to figure that out, and one of my peers is here now too, and like we're 27 executives and we all have that same task, trying to figure it out. And earlier I was joking because I like Elevators, Outkast song, and I'm like, literally, like nonprofit, for profit, doesn't matter. Like if you don't move your feet, then I don't eat. So we like neck to neck. Like that's real. So at the end of the day, if I can't come up with a sustainable, profitable model, then you guys would be like, well, that's a headline, right? Like everybody is watching us, and if we fail, that's a story, right? If you're a startup and you don't make it, like that becomes a big headline. So there's a lot of pressure that's there, and so that's just like the reality of the situation. So you talk about therapy, I absolutely have a therapist, absolutely, that's real. But anyways, like there's just. We can brainstorm. Yeah. So anyways, there's just like, there's no shortage of things. Like there's no, every day, like I don't have enough time in my day either. Like I could get through the day and it's just like, I could have left, there are 10 things that I could have done that I didn't do. Yeah. And it's in my Slack. And sometimes I just miss it. Like my Slack is probably got some messages right now that I'm just missing. And they're like, where are you? Who cares? Like, this is what I need right now.
Okay, we're going to end on a hopeful note, but before we do that, let's take some questions. I think in the interest of time, just like stand up and yell them out if you got one. I see a hand.
I did? I didn't sense that.
There we go.
For the stream. We're all looking for sustainable revenue models, and we're all living in a time of crisis for the news business. And I guess my question is, how do you preserve the healthy competition that leads to better news coverage and better service to our communities, while at the same time encouraging cooperation between for-profit news and nonprofit news so that everybody can be sustainable?
Feels like a you question.
A me question. Look, this is on that list. This is actually on that list. Like the things that, well, I try not to let things keep me up at night. But what I do try to do is find healthy collaborations. Like, is there an opportunity? This is mutually beneficial. And this is actually like, I have worked with a number of people, like the Marshall Project. We have done a number of projects with them. And it might seem like, and we have talked to others, like we were talking to the 19th News, like Inside Climate, like I'm willing to partner with anyone. Like some people don't know who Axios is. Like I could be out and look, it hits different. When I was like, hey, I work at CNN. Oh, man, I'm sorry, or whatever. Like especially now, it'd be like, never, you missed that? Like
They had one layoff this week. It was a tough one.
They had one, yeah. So name recognition. If I called somebody, hey, do you want to come work for me? They're like, yeah. Now it's a little bit different, right? So I call and I'm like, Axios, startup, well, I mean, I don't know about that. Like, I have to have a pitch. I have to be able to actually sell the dream, and I have to be able to articulate what the vision is and help you to understand what it is right now and what we're trying to build. Like, I have to be able to show I went from 14 to 30 cities, and this is how we did it, and this is how we're going to continue to grow it out. So that's the challenge that I have. But the reason that a partnership works is because we both need branding, right? Like in some cases, like I might be able to help you because I have a newsletter that has a 50 to 60% open rate, and that's good for you. But I'm also reaching an audience that you might not actually be getting on a day-to-day basis. So that is actually a sales pitch to a lot of people. And it's actually like, if you're in a space, like you're in WhatsApp and we partner, like I'm not in WhatsApp, that's cool, what's up, you know? And that's the way that I look at that. Like, so can we work together collaboratively? Like, does it matter what your profit model is? No, because at the end of the day, if you don't have cash, you can't keep doing it.
Okay, wow, lots of hands. Let's go over here.
You were saying, Delano, that like you're not in competition, but you know, for-profit
Adjacent.
news fundamentally is about turning money into meaningful news. And for-profit is about turning news into money. And we're, who are doing nonprofit, are about turning money into meaningful news. So when Axios or another for-profit organization is bringing news, you are doing something in our market, which is you're changing what people expect of the news. And if what they're expecting is these quick hits, right, you're changing how people have an appetite for news. What happens a lot with for-profit news is it's teaching people to want junk food. And we're trying really hard to teach them to want healthy news. So I want to encourage you to think about the ways in which you're changing our readers, potentially. Not just changing our market, but actually changing how our audience thinks about news.
Was that a question?
It's a criticism.
It didn't sound like a question. Okay, let's do questions. Let's do questions. Let's do a question. One over. Well, let's do you over there. Also, I think I work for a for-profit news organization, and we try very hard to not serve people junk food. I just want to say that. Oh, yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Lucas with Next City. So for Axios Local, it is for-profit, and it also isn't profitable yet. So they were originally anticipating doing 100 newsrooms. They're at 30. They're stopping this year, right? But to fill the gap, is there a possibility that you might consider asking readers for direct support or foundations like a lot of for-profits have gone to? And for the whole stage, the question is, how do we feel about for-profit organizations that do take that tack to ask for direct support from readers if they're not a nonprofit?
That's a Jim Bernhardt question. But the Delano answer for that is, like, that is my task, is to try to figure out how to make it profitable, right? And I absolutely, sorry, I would push back on junk food, because that's not what it is. Like, that's also, like, that's not even the journalist that I am. So for me to come into the newsroom, it was, these are the constraints. Like, people have a changing, the appetite has changed, period. I don't have any control over that. Just like, you know, going from horseback to telegrams to radio to television to the internet. Like, this is another iteration of how journalism is changing, period. Right? And there was resistance whenever television came along. That's just what history says. So we have to figure out how to adapt the model to make it work for the appetites that people have. That'd be like, I worked at CNN, the ratings they didn't decline because of Chris Lick. They were declining before. They declined after Trump. They declined because the news started chasing Trump. So to answer your question, like, I don't have the answer. I'm trying to figure that out just like everybody else is. Like, how do you actually plug that gap? And so part of it is giving people, like, really good news, and it is going to come in a concise way. Why? Because who doesn't wake up and that they don't have their phone next to them? Like, and like, the habit is changing. Like, my daughter doesn't even know what cable television is, like cable news. Like, she doesn't know what that is. Why? Because they stream everything. So all we're trying to do is move like water. So we're in the space. So if we're in the space and we're effective and we have good quality news, then people click on that. Like, that's what the data shows us. That's what the statistics show us. Like, are you going to turn a profit immediately? No, because Axios Local is only 2.5 years old. So we have to kind of like build out that runway, and it's going to take a little bit of time.
I want to also jump in on something here. I'm not sure the competition is entirely profit versus nonprofit. I think the competition is also nonprofit versus nothing. Do you want a world with nothing? And there are people who want nothing, and that's going to survive, and that's going to be a model in some communities. I think what we're proving, many of us in this room, is that there is a market for nonprofit news, and we can be sustainable. And I've only been at this for 2 years, so I'm not an expert, but we are sustainable already after 2 years.
Nice. We only have 2 minutes left on this stage, so I'm going to ask that the remaining questions, maybe you can catch us in the hallways. But before we go, I did want to end on a hopeful note, because we did do some sad stuff. So, Nico, let's go to you, and let's hear something that you're very hopeful about in your work in this rather bleak time for the news business.
Reasons to be hopeful.
Yes.
That there is still a need for information, and people still need information with which they will make decisions in their lives. And then technology changes, however, that need is still there. So, and then that makes us question and self-question ourselves, like, how do we serve that need that is still there? And again, as I said at the beginning, is the form of journalism that we learned in school or that we have always grown up with is still, I mean, are there any other ways to do it? For example, are explainers journalism? We at Documented think so. It's still reporting. It's still sources, right?
I'm relieved to hear that.
Yeah. And then, for example, explainers on TikTok, I don't know, like the largest media newsroom in Spanish language is a bunch of kids or a bunch of young people explaining the news on TikTok. So the need of like how to navigate society is still there, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you, Nico. Emily.
I feel tremendously hopeful. Just in the last year, I have met Steve Shuey of Eden Prairie Local News. I've met Alice Drager of East Lansing Info. I've met my dear friend and my sister separated at birth, Regina Clarkin, running the Peekskill Herald. I've met my publisher, who was a harsh critic and came to me and we said, I see a connection here. Would you like to be our publisher? The people in this room are all potential allies. They are all people I can learn from and grow from. I never knew any of you a year ago, 2 years ago. That to me gives me so much hope. So I want to leave on that note.
Thank you. Delano.
Well, I am very hopeful because there are a lot of people in this room, and that means that journalism is thriving, and it's thriving in a number of ways. I went to speak to some students, and they said, is journalism dead? Is journalism dying? Absolutely not. Journalism, if it is dying, has been dying since I got into it more than 23 years ago. And that was the same thing. It was very disruptive then. I could date myself, but when I was at my college newspaper, I actually was like, hey, this internet thing is cool. Like, let's put some stories on here and do like this thing that they're doing at the Beacon Journal. Like, we should do that in college. Like, same, right? So I'm old enough to see that change. I'm old enough to see the iterations of news change, and I'm also somebody who is constantly read because I like to read history. And as I've said to you guys before, if we go back to 1882, whenever the light bulb came on, the New York Times was absolutely on that block. And so to me, that says that when it comes to news, we are always the innovators of whatever the technology is of the time period. And I've said it to students, and I will say it to this room. News is just like a caveman that runs out and says there's a large beast out there that might eat you. And at the end of the day, like, you can go out there, but if you go over there, you might get eaten. Like, that's what news is. And as long as we're conveying the importance of news, no matter how you're doing it, for profit, not for profit, like, it does not matter. If you are stenciling it, if you're putting it on a pigeon's leg and sending it up in the air, at the end of the day, you use whatever vehicle, whatever platform you've got, WhatsApp, like, at the end of the day, we're disseminating more news and people are getting more news than they ever have. How can you not be optimistic about that? Like, the model has been completely disrupted. Like, we had a model and it was one way. We went from having just 3 channels to having a whole bunch, a whole cadre of channels. And like, it continues to just explode because we have more people. I don't care how people get it. Just serve them the news where they're at. And if you're gonna be the watchdog of your community and you give it to them in smart brevity, who cares? Like, if I give you smart brevity, are you not gonna give me a Pulitzer because I broke news and because we did something that nobody else did? No, I don't believe that. I don't subscribe to that, and I never will. And that's why I'm optimistic, and that's why I do what I do.
All right, a round of applause for our panel, please. Thank you very much.
And a round of applause for our moderator, too, Sean. Thanks to all my friends up on the stage here. Really appreciate you.